Getting the memo. President Trump bashes the Russia probe as his former FBI director's notes are released to Congress. Outside the family, an expert tells us what, if anything, will change in Cuba with a new president. Guided by faith, a Trump administration nominee tells us how being a Christian influences his decisions. And a mighty wind. Pope Francis tips his cap to Mother Nature. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 20th, 2018. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. Well, new details tonight. Memos by former FBI Director James Comey are shared with Congress. He took personal notes of his talks with President Trump. Comey alleges the president demanded his loyalty and asked about the possibility of jailing journalists. The president calls the former FBI director a liar and a leaker. White House correspondent Mark Irons tells us more. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jason. Much of what is contained in these 15 pages of documents has already been shared publicly by Comey. Some of the material has been blacked out as classified by the Justice Department, but the memos do reveal colorful conversations the president had with the man he would later fire.
Oh, and there's James. Will you please? He's become more famous than me.
A series of interactions James Comey had with the president were documented by the former FBI director and have now been publicly unveiled. Comey says in 2017 the president asked for his allegiance, saying he needed loyalty and expected loyalty. He also alleges the president asked him to end the investigation into the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The president said he has serious judgment issues, but still asked Comey, "I hope you can see your way to letting this go, letting Flynn go." The memos take a turn when Comey writes the president claimed allegations involving him and Russian hookers were nonsense, but that Putin had told him, quote, "We have some of the most beautiful hookers in the world." The documents also include the president's musings about pursuing leakers and imprisoning journalists. James Comey is promoting his new book, A Higher Loyalty. He describes Trump as morally unfit to be president. The president says the release of the memos proved that his campaign did not collude with Russia to win him the presidency, tweeting, "James Comey memos just out and show clearly that there was no collusion and no obstruction. Also, he leaked classified information. Wow, will the witch hunt continue?"
As special counsel Robert Mueller's probe continues into possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign, the president is bolstering his own legal team. He has hired former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani to represent him. And now, Jason, the Democratic National Committee is suing the president's campaign, Russia, and WikiLeaks, saying they all conspired to help Donald Trump win the election. Jason.
Wow, a lot of news there. Thank you so much, White House correspondent Mark Irons. And President Trump endorses Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn. She's running to be Tennessee's senator. The president calls Blackburn a wonderful woman, and he says he'll campaign with her. Retiring Senator Bob Corker also backs Blackburn. She served in Congress since 2003 and chaired the House's investigation into Planned Parenthood. 66 senators of both parties demand Turkey release an American pastor accused of helping terrorist groups. In a letter to the country's president, the lawmakers say Andrew Brunson's indictment was an absurd collection of anonymous accusations, flights of fantasy, and random character assassination. They're demanding the evangelical be reunited with his family. And I spoke yesterday with Senator Tom Tillis from Brunson's home state of North Carolina. He was the first to sign the letter. Senator Tillis tells me sanctions against Turkey are an option. Pope Francis's homeland seems closer than ever to allowing abortion. People trying to change the law charge ahead with a wave of protests. Argentina's lawmakers are expected to vote in June on a bill to allow abortion in the first 14 weeks. The country's president says he will not veto it. Abortion in Argentina is illegal, except in cases of rape or if the mother's health is in danger. And Britain's Supreme Court won't hear the case of terminally ill toddler Alfie Evans. The 23-month-old is in a hospital in Liverpool. His father met this week with Pope Francis. The Vatican has offered to treat the child at its children's hospital, but courts in England have said no, saying that move would cost too much money. The Holy Father prayed for the child this week at his weekly audience. And Prince Charles will succeed his mother as head of the Commonwealth, made up of the United Kingdom and its former colonies. Queen Elizabeth II has led that group of 53 nations throughout her 66-year reign. Leaders from the countries made the decision unanimously. Protests erupt for a second day in Nicaragua. They're angry over planned Social Security reform. The government shut down 5 TV stations covering the protests, including one Catholic channel. The Social Security changes include higher income and payroll taxes. The Holy See is defending the rights of Native people in the Amazon, saying their lands, culture, and rights are being ignored. The Vatican's UN ambassador says the region is exploited for economic reasons. Pope Francis earlier this year visited the Amazon. And we're getting the first clues about how Cuba will be run under its new leader. Raul Diaz-Canel this week was named president. He replaces 86-year-old Raul Castro. But for now, things may not be much different. Diaz-Canel says Castro will lead the decisions about the future of the country. Raul and his older brother Fidel ruled the island nation with total control for nearly 60 years. Ana Quintana is a Latin American policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. She joins us now. Does this really seem to be a transition of power? Is this a real change or just business as usual?
I mean, essentially, we can look at Diaz-Canel as a puppet president. I mean, Raul Castro is not retiring. Raul Castro is remaining in control of the Communist Party, and he's remaining in control of the armed forces. Those are essentially the 2 pillars of power in Cuba, right? I mean, they control the country's economy, and they also control the ideology and the policies that the country sets forward. So, I mean, we're not going into a new era, no.
So what will his role be then?
Diaz-Canel's role? I mean, Diaz-Canel, his role is to essentially make it seem like the regime is changing. Like he's a new face, he's a fresh face, and Cuba is open for business. Cuba right now is in a dire economic situation. The money that they used to count on from Venezuela is simply not there because Venezuela is in a dire humanitarian crisis. And they want to open up to the world. And I mean, not open up, but they want to make it seem to the world that foreign investment is safe. And I mean, what better than a new face?
One of the things that he said was that he wants to reform the economy, but he also made it very clear that he's going to preserve the communist regime. So will the average person on the streets, the average worker for the government there makes, what, $30 a month? So is there any hope that things will get better for those people, the normal Cuban citizens?
The average Cuban monthly wage is about $20-ish a month, right? $20-ish in U.S. currency. There's really no such thing as dictator down economics, right? I mean, like a dictator does not economically empower his people to the point where they will then foment a political kind of revolution, because then that's what's next, right? You have your economic needs met. Now you're going to want to have your political needs met. So we should not expect for Diaz-Canel to kind of change the economic system to a point where there will be political change. I mean, he himself yesterday said that, yes, I want to reform Cuba's economic system, but we will never revert to capitalism. I mean, he's telling us he's essentially predicting the future.
Well, President Obama tried to open up U.S. relations in an effort to, in a way to help. They thought that having business ties would help lead to increased human rights in the country. And then President Trump has reversed many of those changes. So what do you think the right approach should be for the U.S. government in relation to Cuba?
Well, President Obama's approach was flawed because it opened up economic and commercial opportunities with the Cuban military, security, and intelligence services. It did not open up economic opportunities with the Cuban people. And that's what President Trump fixed. He closed those loopholes that specifically allowed for that. And I think U.S. policy should be based on how can we find ways of empowering the Cuban people economically, but how can we also find ways of empowering Cuba's dissidents and Cuba's political opposition. I mean, they are the change makers. They are the future of the island. The day that there will be a free and fair Cuba, it will be under their rule.
What about for the Catholics in the country? I think there's many, many Catholics that live in Cuba. Will things improve for them?
Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be that way. Diaz-Canel, when he was Minister of Education, he shut down a ton of school programs run by the Catholic Church. He seems to have an open hostility, just like his predecessors, to religious freedom on the island. So I don't think things are looking well. Okay, well, Ana Quintana studies Latin America for the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
And Pope Francis calls on Christians to be beacons of hope. It happened on a short trip to southern Italy.
Siamo chiamati tutti, in qualsiasi situazione ci troviamo.
Pope Francis visited two small Italian towns. He prayed at the grave of Bishop Tonino Bello. Today marks the 25th anniversary of the death of that Italian bishop. His sainthood case opened in 2007. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Now, last month, Pope Francis visited the same region to pay tribute to St. Padre Pio. Today, he went to honor Bishop Tonino. Why did the Pope visit the same region 2 months in a row?
Well, precisely because of that, Jason, he went to see to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the death of Padre Pio last month, and this month is the 25th anniversary of the death of Bishop Antonio Bello. And I think the Pope feels very in tune with this bishop, who had a great sympathy for the poor.
And this bishop was known as the pastor of mercy. I also know he's being considered for sainthood. What else can you tell us about him?
Yes, well, he was really a champion of the poor, and he called it the church an apron of service, meaning that the apron symbolizes service, and that was his great approach to the church, was one of service, but also of peace. He was a very strong fighter for peace, campaigner for peace. He was president of Pax Christi. He also campaigned against the Gulf War in 1990 and also against NATO. And Pope Francis called him today a prophet for our times.
And after the Pope celebrated Mass today, the current bishop of that area gave the Holy Father a gold rose. What does that mean?
Well, the golden rose is traditionally a token of reverence and praise, really, for the risen Christ. And the risen Christ in glorious majesty. That's the definition of the golden rose, and it's often bestowed either by the Pope to Our Lady as a veneration to Our Lady, or it's given to members of heads of state, or even to popes. And that was the case today when the bishop presented a golden rose to the Holy Father.
Okay, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks for keeping us in the loop.
Thank you, Jason.
Coming up, mourners gather in Houston to honor former First Lady Barbara Bush. And one graduating class will get a speech from none other than President Trump. High school students across the country hold another walkout. They're marking the anniversary of the 1999 shooting at Columbine High School. Organizers expected more than 2,700 walkouts. The students are fighting for tougher gun laws. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. A deputy of former FBI Director James Comey says he's very upset and disappointed by words in Comey's memos. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe disputes some of the comments, especially a conversation about leaks to the media over an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. McCabe was fired last month. A Justice Department report says he lied under oath to investigators. To talk about this, we're joined by Melissa Quinn, reporter with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us. And so in your view, is there any big breakthroughs in the Comey, any big revelations in the Comey memos?
I don't think so. I think a lot of people were sort of crossing their fingers and hoping that we were going to have some more bombshells, but we already know what those bombshells are. They are that Trump reportedly, according to Comey's recollection, asked Comey to pledge loyalty to him, and then the second one being that Trump reportedly, again according to Comey, asked Comey to end the FBI's investigation into Michael Flynn. I think what we did learn more is that Trump actually had some reservations about Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor. He at one point apparently turned to Comey and said, "I question his judgment regarding the timing of a phone call back to a foreign leader after the inauguration."
But he left him on staff for a while until he was forced, until he fired him a little bit later. So, in your view, looking at these memos, is Trump vindicated? Obviously, depending on who you talk to, Republicans were happy. They were tearing out things to praise, and Democrats were also pulling out things to praise in these memos. Who's vindicated here?
Well, President Trump certainly thinks that he is vindicated. He tweeted just last night that the Comey memos prove there was, in all caps, no collusion and no obstruction. This is a line that we've heard from the president multiple times. I think what's important to remember, though, is some of the information, these memos actually in particular, were given to Robert Mueller as part of the investigation into Russian meddling. So this isn't any new information for Mueller or his team of investigators either. either.
And we heard a lot of these things in the testimony he gave to Congress. Yes. My question is, will this have any impact on Mueller's investigation?
Well, the two claims, first the loyalty pledge, as well as Comey's recollection that Trump asked him to end the investigation into Flynn, those are, according to some reports, going to be part of what may be an obstruction of justice claim from Mueller, and certainly we know Democrats on Capitol Hill really have pointed to those two examples and said that they do believe that in both of those cases there was a potential that Trump obstructed justice. Now, we know what's in the memos. Obviously, Mueller's investigation and his team has been really, really tight-lipped, so I don't think in terms of whether there was anything additional that could be used as part of the Russia probe, we're not going to know that for a while.
So we'll have to wait until everything comes out at the end of this investigation, which Rudy Giuliani, who's just joined the legal team, says it's going to be very quick here. Looking at the midterm elections, another big story this year, President Trump just endorsed Marsha Blackburn to be a senator in Tennessee. Will that help her in that state of Tennessee?
Well, in Tennessee, I think it actually will help her. He won 92 of 95 counties in the whole entire state. Wow. Now, there is something that I think is of to note there, which is that Marsha Blackburn's Democratic challenger, former Governor Phil Bredesen, actually won 95 of 95 counties when he won for governor. And there has been some talk that really Bredesen could be a crossover candidate that garners the support of even some Republican voters. I think when we're looking at the Tennessee Senate race, it's important to keep it into context in terms of President Trump's previous support in special elections, although this will be a general election, both in Pennsylvania and in Alabama with Roy Moore and Rick Saccone. President Trump went out and campaigned for him. He also campaigned for Luther Strange. And at the end of the day, his support really didn't make a lot of a difference. Democrats in both of those races won. So even though, of course, there is a large amount of support for President Trump in Tennessee, we'll have to see the long-term impact that makes when he does eventually go out and campaign for her.
And we'll hope you have you back on to talk more about that in the future. Thank you, Melissa Quinn from the Washington Examiner. Thank you very much. And President Trump says it's his great honor to speak to the U.S. Naval Academy's 2018 graduating class. It'll be his first time speaking at the Academy's graduation. The ceremony is May 25th. The president was invited to speak last year, but was in Italy for a summit. In his place, Vice President Pence spoke to the graduates in Annapolis. Up next, a First Lady is laid to rest in Houston.
Everything we've gotten from the Lord, somebody prayed for it somewhere.
Happy birthday, Mother Angelica. Mother would have been 95 years old today. The spunky girl from Ohio is the founder of the largest religious media network in the world, EWTN. And we're glad to have you with us tonight right here on EWTN. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. Now, some members of a caravan of Central American migrants continue their journey to the U.S. border. Around 500 immigrants hop on the roofs of a train in western Mexico. They could reach the border next week. The caravan drew angry tweets from President Trump. Earlier this week, Lauren Ashburn interviewed the U.S. candidate for a key UN position.
Ken Isaacs is the vice president of the Christian International Relief Organization Samaritan's Purse. He's been nominated to lead the United Nations International Organization for Migration. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren. It's good to be with you.
You have been doing relief work for decades, Ethiopia to Iraq, and you were recently to the Vatican. Tell us about that experience.
It was an incredible experience. You know, the Vatican, first of all, is the homeland of the Holy See. It was quite something. Having the opportunity to meet the Pope was an honor.
And what did you discuss at the Vatican?
So the things that I discussed are migration, how the Catholic Church sees migration, what their concerns are about both migrants and refugees, sort of different categories of people. And then when I met the Pope, I thanked him for his heart for migrants and for refugees and all that he was doing to help them.
Do you agree with his positions?
Well, that's in general, yes, I do. I believe that human rights have to be respected. People deserve dignity. They're each a special creation made in God's image, and at the same time I recognize the rights of sovereign states to determine their own domestic migration policies. So yes, we agree on these things.
Prudential judgment, I think, is the word that is used in the Catholic Church. That global experience is what led the Trump administration to nominate you, yet critics have issues with your candidacy, saying that you are not able to fairly represent migrants given some of your social media posts, including Nice, Islam is not peaceful, immigration wall, Austria, Switzerland, consider building a wall in the Alps to control their borders from refugees. You apologized for these. Why did you write them?
Well, 140 characters.
I know.
The context of it. So on the wall of the Alps, does anybody really think that I really meant build a wall through the Alps mountains? That's called sarcasm, and that was actually saying there has to be another way to bring safe, orderly, and regular migration to it. So a lot of these have been taken out of context. I apologize for hurting people, but in my entire career, I have never discriminated against anyone, and I never will.
What is your strategy when it comes to refugees and migrants? You worked at Samaritan's Purse. You helped these people. I've interviewed other people from Samaritan Purse. It is on the ground, tough work.
Yes.
Tell us what you see as the right way.
I see more migration in the future than has been in the past. I see a circumstance in the world where more human needs are going to have to be met, where countries are going to have to develop more legal pathways for people to come into their country. They're coming anyway. They're coming across the Mediterranean. They're coming up through Mexico. So how is this going to be controlled? This is the question of our time.
It must be hard, though, to see the suffering of those people and then not think about letting them into countries where they would be safe.
You're absolutely right. It is hard. This is where the bigger issue lies. It's where the bigger issue of human suffering is. So again, every nation has a sovereign right to determine its own migration policy, and that includes the United States. It has that sovereign right, just like Italy has it, like Germany has it, and they all interpret it differently. They all have their own domestic migration policies.
Ken Isaacs, nominee for the United Nations International Organization for Migration. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Barbara Bush's funeral service tomorrow will be filled with prominent names in American politics. But today, it's the public's chance to mourn and celebrate her life. Many Houstonians are proud to have called Barbara Bush neighbor.
She's done so much. The love for children and literacy, I think, is just awesome. Besides, she's just such a wonderful wife and mother.
They wanted to make Houston their home, so that is just very, very special.
The former First Lady and her husband may have taken up residence in Washington and elsewhere over the years, but for nearly 6 decades, they always came back here. Today, it's the chance to say goodbye to their neighbor. A public viewing at St. Martin's Episcopal Church before Saturday's private funeral. An open celebration of Mrs. Bush's life took place outside Houston City Hall last night, just across the street from Houston's downtown public library. Fitting for a First Lady who championed literacy. For some here, the loss still felt very personal.
Barbara Bush was an amazing lady and just a great role model, and I'm an English teacher, and she, was always literacy and push literacy.
The crowd was encouraged to wear blue and to copy Mrs. Bush's signature style by donning some pearls.
I love that style. I love the style. She never changed. She never changed it. That was her staple, so I really appreciated that about her. And she was just Barbara, and I love that.
And may Barbara Bush rest in peace. And finally tonight, as we reported earlier, Pope Francis had a busy day visiting 2 towns in southern Italy. You could almost say he was blown away by it.
Partigiani della pace, perché costruire la pace è un'arte che...
And on one stop, a strong gust of wind swept the zucchetto off of his head. The Holy Father didn't miss a beat. Once he got it back, he tucked it into his sash. And for the entire EWTN News Nightly team, we thank you for watching tonight. We'll be back Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.